It's Memorial Day Monday in Tryon, North Carolina, and I'm going to make this devotion brief as I know that all of you had a busy weekend, and I hope that you made sure that church was part of that and that you also took time to just meditate and to pray for the families of those that have been lost in our military serving our country. One scripture verse, John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. Now, we know that that refers to Jesus, but it also refers to all of those men and women who have served in our armed forces, who have given their life for their friends. It's really interesting if you look back at the history of war, you'll see that the U.S. has paid a tremendous price to try to lay down their lives for friends. First in 1775 through 1783, 8 years, we find that 25,000 lost their lives as we declared our independence from Britain. In the War of 1812, which I've got to admit I knew so little about that I had to go back and research it, in the Battle of 1812, 20,000 U.S. people lost their lives. What was it about? Well, it was about Britain and the U.S. having conflicts about trade and about the seas. And the U.S. was forced to declare war against Britain because of the aggressive action that they were taking and the restriction of trade. So in some ways it was a second Declaration of Independence, if you will, from Britain. The Mexican-American War, 13,283 were killed in 1846 to 1848. Again, the border was the dispute. Mexicans claimed the border was in one place, the U.S. claimed another, and the battle pursued. The Civil War, which was anything but civil, was fought in 1861 to 1865, 4 years. 625,000 U.S. citizens lost their lives. 625,000. Don't tell me that this whole thing of equality didn't have its price, because the major issue of the Civil War, of course, was slavery, and the fact that the federal government wanted to abolish slavery and the southern states did not want to. Economically, they had become dependent upon slave labor in their plantations and farms, and it was quite a costly war for both the North and the South. World War I, 116,516 U.S. troops were killed. It was in 1917 to 1918. The United States was drug into that war to support our allies, and it was not a war that we started, not a war that we wanted, but we were drug into that war when the Germans sunk some of our ships off the coast of England, and we were forced to enter into that war, but we lost 116,516 men and women in that war. World War II, 1941 to 1945, 405,399 U.S. troops were lost in World War II. Most of you realize that that, again, was not our war, but we were drug into that war by a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. And for all of the publicity that's going on right now, I think that it's fair to say that it's a shame that we had to use nuclear weapons, the atomic bomb, in order to defeat Japan. However, to say that our attack on Japan was an unprovoked attack is obviously not true. Not only that, but the atrocities that were perpetrated on citizens throughout the area of Japan and through the Pacific were incredible. The treatment of war prisoners by the Japanese was atrocious. And while the killing of that many people in Japan was a terrible thing, nevertheless, it did bring to an end the war, and hundreds of thousands of people had been killed by the Japanese prior to that. And so it was not an unmeasured strike, and it was a strike that was intended for military targets, not civilian targets, and to cripple the Japanese war machine, which had devastated the region and had attacked Pearl Harbor. Again, a shame that it was necessary, but probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives by bringing the war to an end. The Korean War, once again, was not a war that we initiated. North and South Korea had been formed after World War II, and 1950 to 1953, the Chinese and the Russians encouraged the North Koreans to invade South Korea. The UN was involved, and the United States took the lead with Allied forces to try to prevent the spread of communism through South Korea. And as they did, there was a tremendous defeat by the Americans, and then the Chinese re-established themselves and sent in thousands and thousands of troops, pushed the Americans and the Allied forces to the south. The Allied forces rekindled their efforts and pushed them back up to the original line of North and South Korea, and finally a peace was established. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. Terrible war because we lost 58,209 U.S. soldiers and military personnel, and the war drug on for 20 years. It's really quite a tragic war from the standpoint that initially started with France trying to defend South Vietnam, which was one of their territories, and the United States got drug into the war, and then France bailed out. And the Americans were left to fight to try to stop the spread of communism into South Vietnam. And unfortunately, of all of the wars that we've ever entered into, even though we did not start this war, but had been involved in it, was a defeat for the United States, and the fact that we were driven out of Vietnam, and we finally gave up on trying to save South Vietnam. 58,209 lives were lost. But remember, all of those lives did what our government asked them to do. And go back to our scripture verse. Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends. We tried to be the friends of the South Vietnam. We tried to be the friends of the French government. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of lives and lost the war. Then we have the Afghanistan War, which came directly after September 11th, 2001. We lost 2,356 lives during the 13 years that followed after that in Afghanistan, but we were successful in running out the Taliban-run government and the stronghold for the Al-Qaeda attacks on America. We continue to fight in Afghanistan. It is a difficult country to keep in peace. Nevertheless, Al-Qaeda was dealt a tremendous blow, but it cost Americans 2,356 lives just through those 13 years, and we still lose lives there now. The Iraqi War, it lasted for 9 years. It started in 2003. The United Nations was very much involved in that. There were very definitely weapons of mass destruction. Iraq refused to dispose of them or to give an account for them. Iraq also claimed to have the power to keep America from invading their country, and even though the United Nations was with us and our allies were with us in trying to get Iraq to stop the genocide of the different sects of people, And when they invaded Kuwait, it set the stage for the United States to invade Iraq, and 4,489 U.S. troops lost their lives in Iraq. And again, as another country like Afghanistan, it's taking our continual presence to keep peace in the region. During World War II, the total death, not just U.S. soldiers, but the total death of World War II was 60 million people. Of that, in Hiroshima, where we dropped the atomic bomb, there was 166,000 people that died within 6 months. In Nagasaki, there was 80,000 lives lost within the first 6 months. The two cities were both military cities. They were both areas where military supplies were made, manufactured, and the toll was so devastating that it forced Japan to their knees and probably prevented hundreds of thousands of additional people from being killed. When all of the controversy recently with our president going there and some calling it an apology and others saying no, it wasn't an apology, it was just an acknowledgement, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. But I want you to know that we were not unjustified, and the decision to try to bring the war to an end came from great aggression by Japan and great atrocities in the Philippines and throughout the Pacific in the prisoner of war camps and the attack on Pearl Harbor. We had to do what we had to do, and I think that if both countries are honest about it, yes, we're sorry it took that kind of an action, but I would hope that the Japanese are just as sorry for the atrocities that they had against many other countries, including the United States, that brought on that attack with nuclear weapons. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. Our men and women of the U.S. military have laid down their lives for us and for our friends, for our allies, for Britain, for Italy, for France. We have laid down our lives for our own country in the most recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we have hopefully substantially cut into the power of Al-Qaeda, and hopefully in the future months we'll do the same thing with ISIS, and we'll bring peace to the world again. But our men and women gave all. That's what Memorial Day is all about. I hope that you'll take a few minutes, even if you don't watch this video until after Memorial Day, to pray for the families of those who made that supreme sacrifice. For it was a supreme sacrifice. No matter which war and whether we wanted or lost it, our men and women did what their government asked them to do. And they did it with honor, with courage, and with a great cost. And there's no greater love than that. That's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.